With the recession of the Western Roman Empire, the political strife that consumed the North thereafter, and the devastating dust veil that brought about a seemingly endless winter, the society that emerged from beyond that veil quite literally rose from the ashes of trauma. The North wasn't destroyed entirely, but it did change dramatically. For one thing, the once heavily divided landscape was now a bit emptier. Estimated population loss in Scandinavia was as high as 50%, and land ownership concentrated into fewer hands as local elites reclaimed the remnants for themselves. To put it bluntly, those elites appropriated abandoned land, but also seized it by force. They then created great halls, surrounded themselves with a trusted military retinue, and parceled out their newly claimed land to renters and retainers. In short, they redefined power along one's right to own land after taking that land away from the families that used to own it and forcing them to pay rent or military service in order to stay. Pretty messed up, isn't it? Nevertheless, these self-made elites, we'll go ahead and call them warlords, are the very men and families who dominate the sagas of Norse legend. The Volsungs, featured in the saga The Volsungs, the Ynglings of the Sviar, featured in the saga of the Yinglings, and the Skjoldungs of the Danir, featured in the saga of Rolf Kraki. Love them or hate them, they're the ones that set the stage for the Scandinavia of the Viking Age. For one thing, it's during this period, arguably, that the foundations of Norse lore as we know it began to form. As they solidified power into their hands, skalds, that is poets, sung their authority into the very fabric of their lore for future generations to remember and repeat. The following are also great king's lines. From Yngvi, whom the Ynglings are descended from Skjold, whom the Skjoldungs are descended from Volsung and Frankia, they are called the Volsungs. These families that have just been named have been used in poetry in such a way as to treat these as honorific titles. Of course, those powerful dynasties also etched their authority into the very landscapes that they had recently conquered, and the remnants of their efforts can still be seen in Scandinavia today. 3 locations were particularly influential leading up to the Viking Age: Lera in Denmark, the Danir; Vestfold in Norway, the Northmen; and Gamla Uppsala in Sweden, the Sviar. You can find these locations using the interactive map that I've included with the textual version of this lesson, which also includes pictures and brief descriptions. You can also explore that map to learn more about those particular sites, but for the sake of clarity, I'll only cover how they acted as pillars of a new society in this video. Those sites, as well as others that have been found or forgotten, demonstrate how the very landscape of the North was given new meaning, order, and authority by those elites. Although their burial mounds represent the end of an era, they nevertheless reflected their life's wealth and prestige for future generations. While they lived, those very goods were used to show their status as warlords and reward warriors for their service. They also used them to entice their people to gather in their halls for feasting, rather than enjoying open-air communal feasts that they had in centuries prior. Indeed, their halls were like burial mounds for the living, richly filled and functioning as a stage for the performance of power. Their halls thus became the new heart of society, the place where people gathered to tell tales, reinforce their bonds, exchange gifts, and seek new opportunities. The very foundations of Viking Age society, and the space in which the very first Viking raids were planned. Yet, maintaining this new system wasn't cheap. How could they afford to flaunt so much wealth while also rewarding their retainers so richly? Well, at the most peaceful level, these elites revived long-distance trade networks and expanded them even further than they had been before, to Byzantium, Arabia, China, and even Japan, by the 8th century at least. This, along with land ownership and control over local resources, gave them access to wealth and luxuries needed to reward their retainers, whose loyalty hinged upon the gifts that they expected to receive. But why bother with such expensive retainers at all? To expand the reach of their hall, of course. These were warlords, after all. Much of their power originated in the forceful acquisition of land and its resources, and the subsequent distribution of that land and its wealth to oath-bound followers. Furthermore, the North was still highly competitive. Every warlord could still be challenged, even by their own retainers. This meant that every hall required a strong, well-rewarded retinue to protect and pursue its interests, especially since military expeditions against fellow wealth-hoarding warlords, as in taking plunder or tribute from them, was usually more effective than taking the time to orchestrate and maintain trade networks. As a result, the Hall rose alongside a surge in iron production from the 500s onward, forging the swords, armor, and ships needed to keep their halls and reputations thriving. All of these developments, the consolidation of power in the North, the rise of expansionist hall-based elites, and the increasing demand for prestigious goods to reward retainers with, created the foundations for what would soon be called the Viking Age. From this point on, these warlords, along with their retinues and even their rivals, would expand their reach far beyond the North. They would travel to Byzantium and beyond to offer their goods themselves, rather than relying on intermediate merchants. And they would sail overseas to plunder prosperous kingdoms seemingly beyond their reach. They would then bring that wealth back home, use it to build a retinue of their own, and challenge the warlords of their homeland. In other words, the Viking Age was simply an extension of this earlier period, and the major difference for the Vikingar would be the scale and spread of their activity.